We're finally done with the starter deck reveals and finally in set 1 of Divine's reveals. But now the starter decks are finally all out and we know the information of what the cards are in and what cards will support them technically, even though they should have been part of the product initially. I want to talk about which ones are the best and rate them in this video. Also, hi, I haven't uploaded in ages. I'm sorry. I decided to take a little holiday for myself because my brother was visiting and I realized that with a lot of the YouTubers these days burning out, I think the best way to avoid that is by giving myself a bit of a break sometimes. So thank you for waiting. Happy New Year. Welcome back. So we're gonna do things in an interesting way today where, of course, the starter decks themselves, they come in just the package with just the grade 3 having the effect on top of the Sentinels, which of course, you know, we can just look at the grade 3s and compare them and that's the end of it. But on top of that, I also want to take a look at how these decks rank when you put all of the cards that were supposed to be in the product that are in the first booster set, and so how good the ride lines are, as well as the one unique support card that is not the same effect across all 6 nations. So let's get into it. We're gonna work with this little tier list right here as usual. S, A, B, C, pretty easy to understand. Starting off with Dragon Empire. So we're gonna first rank everything in terms of just the starter deck boss itself, as in the only card that, you know, like what you get in the package. The Dragon Empire boss feels like it is the most like above average from them all. It doesn't generate card advantage for you, but it does take away card advantage from your opponent with the retire, and it is one of the few boss cards that both gets a power and a critical addition, and it's the only one that gets an extra crit too. So while a worse version of this maybe wouldn't have the crit on it and just the power, the crit itself is kind of what puts this card as like a solid A for me. All of these boss cards find a Persona Ride as well while gaining plus 10k power, so they immediately are 23k attackers, which is a good number, plus having Persona Ride too. But I think that having that retire plus the crit makes this a pretty average card overall, and 28k is a funny number because of course it is, if you're especially playing like starter deck format, gonna be a 2-card guard at all times, where you can't even want to pass it with a 15. And so therefore, in terms of how much card advantage it takes away from your opponent, it actually will add up to being more over the course of a game. Our Dark States boss, Osera Jest, is a very good one that I personally would put in S for the simple reason that it generates a 4th attack from the soul and on top of that gives it power. So this is really huge because the power increment is also plus 10k to that rear guard, and in general, extra attacks in Vanguard are always very good. So no matter what deck you're playing, if it generates extra attacks, is always considered good, and that's why decks like Buff Sagara over the years have always felt kind of like, man, when is it going to get a 4th attack? Because while power increments can potentially mean that you're asking for more cards of your opponent's hand, it's still one battle, which means that if there's a card with an effect like a Sentinel or a defensive card that gains extra shield, that extra power increment doesn't necessarily have to mean that extra cards will be discarded to guard it. Whereas an extra attack means that no matter what, an extra card will be required from your opponent to guard that attack. So therefore, especially in these more beginner-friendly formats where we're playing like starter decks versus starter decks, or, you know, very like low upgrade decks, that card advantage is the most important thing in determining who's going to be winning. So because of that, I think the Dark States boss is one of the best ones already. The Branke one, of course, I'm very excited to have a robot finally in standard that isn't just a Vanguarda, but Ushterm is actually a pretty good one for, again, the similar reason that it generates a 4th attack. What's interesting is that while the Dark States one gives plus 10k to the thing it stands, this one gives 5k, but also 5k to himself. So that means that he reaches that same awkward number line of 28, where your opponent cannot want to pass with a 15k guard anymore. So it always requires at least a 2-card commitment. And the plus 5k to a rear guard is also, you know, a bit lower, but it's still that extra card, right? Because if a 10k rear guard gets stood and becomes 20 from a plus 10k power up, the amount of shield, of course, is going to go up, but the amount of cards technically required to guard is not necessarily going to go up as much, especially with, you know, the upgraded starter decks having like extra shield cards in them too. So I think the Branke one for me, just in terms of the within the box itself, is also an S tier card because it generates that 4th attack and distributes the power rather than consolidating it. I will rank it lower than the Dark States one though, because the Dark States one not just makes a 4th attack, it also generates advantage, calling you a card even if you don't have any on the field. Whereas the Branke one does need you to have something on the field and set up. So just for that reason, it does get pushed down a little bit. Now the Keter one, of course, Keter is going to be our protagonist nation in the Divines. So expectations were pretty high, and I think they answered pretty well, because the Keter one, of course, not just gives you a 4th attack, it also gives plus 10k, and it recurs from drop. Drop is sort of an infinite resource, where the soul for the Dark States one will eventually run out if you keep calling it not soul charging, but Zarusael is actually going to keep having targets in the drop no matter what. So therefore it's a less finite resource, and just because of that, I think the Keter one does get to be ranked in S over the Dark States one just for that reason. Now unfortunately the streak of really good boss cards ends there because Stoichea one is quite disappointing. Together with the Dragon Empire one, this is another one that doesn't generate a fourth attack, which as we mentioned before is very valuable, but in exchange, he generates a card advantage of 2 by calling 2 cards back from your drop. In a sealed starter deck only format, this might actually be pretty good because it gives you more card advantage and more recursion than in other decks, so you'll probably be able to out-resource the Brancade trial deck, for example, but it doesn't distribute any power anywhere, it doesn't give you a fourth attack. I would have liked it to at least give plus 5k to the 2 cards it calls if it's not going to give them the extra attack. So just for that reason, our boy Cristianos feels a little bit lukewarm, and so I think it's like a B. And finally, Lyrical. I rated this one very highly on my own stream. Marilyn is cool because she is a multi-attacker that basically really captures the essence of Bermuda / Lyrical. You bounce something, call something, give it power, so you're not generating advantage. Unlike the Dark States one that calls something from soul or the Keter one that calls something from drop, you are just recurring one single card. But the power-up is very appreciated, and the addition of the attack is also appreciated. So I would put this over the Brancade one, but not over the Dark States or Keter ones. I think if you wanted to, you could bump the Brancade one down to Dragon Empire as well, but I think just the ability of having a fourth attack does make the deck a little bit, just one level above. Or you could make those 3 S and then make Brancade A and Dragon Empire B, and then we put Stoichia in C. But so that's the products just in the box themselves. So, you know, just with the boss units as the only card with an ability in the whole deck. What about the addition of the extra cards that are in set 1/2? So as you probably noticed while looking at the card reveals over the weeks, every single nation got the same effect cards across all of these starter decks. They each have a when discard in right phase, Soul Blast 2 to draw 1. They each have a when ditch during right phase, you can call it as rest. They each have a fulfill a certain condition, Counter Blast 1, Energy Blast 3, draw a card and get plus 5k as a booster. So we're not going to look at that. That is basically, you know, you can kind of debate on like, oh, is this condition easier to achieve or not? What we're going to be focusing on is the one unique card of support and the ride lines. So we're going to reset that tier list right now, and starting off with the Dragon Empire one, the ride line is actually pretty good because the grade 1 draws you a card, so it already generates 1 card of advantage. It does cost Energy Blast, which, you know, might be a bit of an expensive resource in the long term, but right now, while there's less cards that use Energy Blast, I mean, even in the first set, there's already quite a few, but for now, it's not as bad. The second one technically can also generate a card advantage, which is the grade 2 of the ride line, or give you energy, which turns into resources later down the line. So I'll call that card advantage too, but the unique card just gains plus 10k once per turn, which is something that we're going to keep seeing through quite a lot of these starter deck supports. So technically we have the ride line that generates 2 cards of advantage, one from the ride line, another one as a draw, and we have a power gainer. So I think Dragon Empire doesn't necessarily move out of A for me. It doesn't necessarily have anything too crazy to add to what it already had. You have a more powerful rearguard now on top of your, you know, existing 3 attacks, which is nice, but the draw power is locked to the ride decks. That means you're only getting it once per game, right? Instead of being like tied to a rearguard that you can reuse, which of course these decks do have in terms of the on discard, etc. effect. But I think that Dragon Empire doesn't necessarily go away from A here. Dark States one is quite interesting because the grade 1 generates soul and power. It gives your grade 2 Vanguard plus 5k, which we've seen throughout prior meta decks is actually a very good thing because it makes guarding the grade 2 turn super awkward, and for that reason I rate the grade 1 quite highly, even if it doesn't generate advantage. Because the grade 2 does draw you a card when you ride into the grade 3, so you get your advantage engine just from the ride line there already. And the unique support card, in my opinion, is the best part because the power distribution is already coming from your Vanguard, but the support card lets you get rid of your other front row rearguard circles in order to, you know, you put a card into soul and draw a card. And the really nice thing is that that opens up the rearguard circle for you to call something with the Vanguard. So it immediately has this good synergistic strategy. It generates card advantage, you're drawing cards, and on top of that, you're also opening up your field to not have to overcall your stuff or your grade 3's effect. So the support card, I think, for Dark States might be the best one. So Dark States for me stays in S. Like, it has multi-attack, it has advantage generation on top of the multi-attacks that really coincides super well with it, and the ride line is good too. The Brancade one's interesting because it does generate advantage by searching out 2 orders, deck thinning 2 orders out of your deck. So they are cards you add to your hand, so you can kind of like ditch them for the ride deck and stuff like that. The only issue is that the unique card of support is just a plus 10k gainer, and the order that you use and search in this deck is CB1 to generate 0 advantage. It's literally just Counterblast 1 to say whenever your rearguard is stood, it gives your Vanguard and the rearguard plus 5k. So essentially it becomes this, like, you know, it's plus 10k to both the Vanguard and the Rearguard, and you can play it on turn 2 and then on turn 3 in order to give plus 15k to both the Vanguard and the Rearguard. So it feels more like an aggro deck where you're not generating as much advantage, but you are going pretty ham in terms of how big the power is on your 4 attacks. So it does feel a bit of a glass cannon, I guess, which for a mech you would expect it to be a bit more sturdy. But again, I digress. I think it's pretty good, but I'm definitely leaning more towards this being maybe just above Dragon Empire. For now, we'll put it just above that in A, because I think the deck might be a bit too frail. Keter though, Keter cooked. Keter has a grade 1 that allows you to get advantage. You can basically call the top card of your deck, and if you don't, it goes to your hand, you have to discard, so you lose out on advantage in that sense. But the top deck call is still very good for a deck that usually will get to do the top deck call. The grade 2 also generates advantage. You call something and draw cards, so you otherwise would not have drawn, so that's actually pretty good. But the unique support card here, again, looks very cool, but just gains plus 10k. It is pretty good though, because now this is gaining plus 10k on top of the Vanguard having given it plus 10k too. So it's a 30k solo swinger without the Persona Ride factored in, and that is pretty big considering how much hand that is actually asking. So Keter 1, I think, again, just the base mechanics are very good. The ride line's very good. It generates advantage. So I think it's going to go in S together with Dark States here. Stoichea 1 is interesting, where the grade 1 draws 2 but discards 2, and from what I know, we don't have a Stoichea card that counts as 2 when discarded. If we did, or if we do get one, that'd be pretty nice. But the grade 2 is pretty nice. It lets you get a grade 1 back from drop. So this of course has some good synergy with Stoichea's general card pool, but even within this deck, you have like the good generic, like when it boosts, kind of must 1 energy blast to draw cards that you can keep reviving or ditch for ride deck and then bring back after. Or even the ride line grade 1, you can like soul blast out and bring back later, and that's going to be an extra 5k booster too. So the grade 2 is good. It's advantage, right? The unique card once again is just a plus 10k power gainer, which this deck really needs. It doesn't have any power gainers normally because the Vanguard doesn't power gain anything other than itself with the first skill. So for that reason, it is good. But at the same time, it feels like maybe it should have given power to more than just itself. Maybe give like itself and another Rearguard plus 10k. I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to overbalance things a little bit here. I think we are not gonna move this out of B either. And finally, Lyrical. Lyrical 1, I think, is a very solid S, because other than technically Dragon Empire, this and Brankgate, this one generates 2 cards of advantage, because the grade 1 lets you call a normal unit and then search your deck for a copy of it added to your hand. This means you can call your PG down, search a PG to your hand, which no other deck can do, which makes it the sturdiest of the starter decks if you're doing just a starter deck battle. And then when you ride over the grade 2 of the ride line, she bounces back a Rearguard so you can get that PG back to hand and calls herself out, so she generates another card of advantage. So you've deck thinned for a card, which sometimes will be a PG, and you've also gotten a grade 2 attacker out of it, who by the way has plus 10k shield on her, so she's a 15k shield just as 1 card, which is really huge, that you always have access to because it's your ride line. The unique card is another plus 10k gainer, but she is very good paired with our Vanguard that calls something mid battle phase. So for that reason, I think the Lyrical 1 is a very, like, probably the best together with Dark States, just because of the potential to deck thin out a PG and then get your other PG back to hand. It is huge. Like, other decks cannot do this, and especially if you're doing just like starter decks with these cards as the upgrades, like replacing the non-effect versions with the effect versions, I think Lyrical and Dark States are the best ones out of these 6. But that's my opinion. Let me know yours in the comments below, and which of these starter decks do you think is the best one? Which of the boss units do you think is the best? Which of the completed versions of the product do you think is the best? My personal vote is Lyrical and Dark States, but I'd love to hear your opinions too. Next, we're going to find out our first divine skills. That's going to be very exciting. And I'm finally back to making content, so look forward to relatively regular uploads. I'll try to get back to daily as best as I can, but there's a lot of very exciting things happening with Worlds coming up next month, so I do hope you look forward to that. But anyway, if you like this video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can consider becoming a YouTube channel member. I haven't made too much YouTube channel member content in the last couple of weeks because I was on holiday, but we're getting back on that too. So channel members, thank you for waiting. More stuff coming soon. But anyway, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.